Quartering Act in 65, and we have the Stamp Act in 65 as well, okay? But under the writs of assistance, because smuggling increases, okay, we have to figure out a way of how to deal with smuggling. And so the Crown says, fine, we'll pass this writs of assistance, which basically means that the Crown can come and search your property at any point in time that they want to, without any sort of, like, you know, hint that you're even doing anything wrong, in order to figure out that you're doing something wrong. It's like your parents going through your phone to see if you're doing something you're not supposed to be doing.
Isn't that why they overthrew or the government in the Glorious Revolution?
I'm not sure. My European history is not great. Okay?
Yeah.
But possibly. Okay? It's part of the reason why we overthrew the Crown. It's also, okay, because it's aimed to reduce this smuggling, okay? In 1761, James Otis, who's a Boston lawyer, if you've ever heard of Otis Elevator Company, been on an elevator or escalator that says Otis, it is his descendants that build the escalators and the elevators, the first ones in America. Okay, does that make sense? So, big name here, prominent family in the colonies. Okay? But he basically argues that the Crown has no authority to search your home without a warrant. And the Crown's saying, well, the writs of assistance acts as our warrant. It's just a blanket warrant. So we can use it whenever we want. And he argues against it based against the idea of the fundamental principles of law. And he argues it's also a violation of the Magna Carta, and it is a violation of English law. And as colonists, they have the right to their own safety and security within their own homes and within their own property. Parliament basically says, well, you know, maybe, but they basically ignore Otis, okay? Otis gains a lot of support for this effort to shut down the writs of assistance through the colonial newspapers. Remember, the newspapers are going to play a huge role in our lead up to revolution. Because it's not like he's just talking to his buddies. This is being spread all across with the use of the papers. And Otis will pen in one of those periodicals talking about the writs of assistance and talking about the Molasses Act in particular, because it's the Molasses Act that they are trying to avoid through smuggling. Does that make sense? He says that the Molasses Act is taxation without representation, because they did not, as British citizens, have the right to vote on this tax. And some of them, had they been in England, would have been members of both, potentially the House, some of them, House of Lords, and some of them, the House of Commons. Because they were landed elite, they were property owners, these were people of wealth. Does that make sense? Who are paying these taxes. So they argued, you can't place this tax on us, we are Englishmen. And the Crown fires back with, well,
come back.
You're not in England. You are in the colonies. How can we ensure you have a vote on any laws that take place in England unless you are in England? It's physically impossible. No Twitter, no phones, none of that, right? No email. It's months of a journey to get across the Atlantic and to come back. So it's not practical, really, for the colonists to have a direct voice in what's going on. And quite frankly, their other argument is, look, you're not the only one of our colonies. We have colonies in India, and we have colonies in Australia, and we have colonies in the African continent, and in South America, and all over the world, and they don't have a voice either.
Like on the same problems, just here.
The colonists' argument is, yes, but those people are not necessarily British citizens. Difference here, because in Australia, right? There are people that move to Australia from England, but the vast majority of those in Australia are not Englishmen. In India, the vast majority of people in India are not Englishmen. Does that make sense? Not by birth, by mere possession of the crown, sure, but not by birth. And the colonists are saying, we are descendants, or from, by birth, Englishmen. So you cannot take these rights from us. The crown argues you are being virtually represented. Because we can't physically actually represent you, right? Okay? Now there is a loophole with the Proclamation of 1763, so just to touch on that, I know we already kind of went through this, but the loophole is this. We can move west, but England must first buy the land from the American Indians. Now think about this. England is in debt. They want the colonists to pay back this debt. Is England going to do anything to buy any additional land? No. So it's kind of a moot point. Yeah, sure, that element is in there, but it's not going to actually ever do anything. But England's basically like, if you would just wait and let us buy the land, and then you can move out there. And the colonists are like, well, legitimately, you are moving way too slow for this process to occur. And again, you're over there on the other side of the ocean. You really don't care about us being able to access land. But because colonists continue to move into that region, there begins to be greater and greater tension amongst the American Indians living over there. And as a result, in 1763 through 1764, there's a series of wars called the Pontiac's Wars, okay? And it's named that for the Ottawa chief. The Ottawa is one of the tribal Indians, okay? But it doesn't just include the Ottawas, okay? It also includes the Senecas. If you've ever heard of the Seneca Falls Declaration, women's rights, beginning of women's rights movement in the United States. Yes, no, maybe so. Not yet. Okay. The Senecas are there. Okay. The Mingos, the Delawares, the Shawnee, the Wyandots, the Miamis, and the Ottomans, and others are all a part of this conjoined fight. So again, we take this idea of the Iroquois Confederacy and we are expanding that. And we are, again, the Native Americans binding together to fight against the influx of whites into their region and into their territory. The British respond to this rebellion to try to put it down by distributing blankets infected with smallpox to the American Indians. There's a South Park episode where they're trying to build a 7-lane superhighway through Colorado. Anybody seen the episode? Okay. And they give blankets infected with SARS to the people of South Park to try to kill them off so they can build their 7-lane superhighway to build the Indian casino. It's American Indians, though, that are doing it to the white people. It's pretty funny.
That's funny.
It is really funny. And when they laugh, ha, 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 ha. It's really funny. If you haven't seen the episode, watch it. It's really funny. It's bad, but funny. Okay. Ultimately, peace is restored, but it's restored because they've killed off a good portion of the American Indians, and the others are really sick. But the tensions remain high. And the people moving into the frontier, in order to try to oppress and to put down those rebellions that flare up every once in a while amongst this confederation, they will use brutality and force to do so. Okay. And they will also try to bring in individuals to help them suppress this rebellion and try to ensure that these rebellions don't grow, including in 1763, they hire, the frontiersmen, hire a group of Philadelphia Scots-Irishmen, okay, to try to prevent another rebellion. Basically what the Paxton Boys do is they attack a town, an unarmed town of American Indians who, FYI, had already converted to Christianity.
This is like the good Indians. Like.
So they were very much they were becoming Anglicanized. Does that make sense? They were assimilating into the mainstream culture. And the Paxton Boys go in with these frontiersmen and they basically declare open season on the American Indians. And simply, if they see one, they shoot them.
That's really dumb. Like if they're set there to prevent rebellion, why would you attack the unarmed one that's only going to spur on rebellion?
Well, if you kill them all off.
Yeah, but you're starting with the unarmed one. I mean, deal with the threat first.
I think they probably messed up on the groups.
Exactly, yeah.
The Christian ones. Probably intentionally to do
Yeah.
that one.
In 1764, we're able to finally create a little bit more of a lasting peace, but you have to understand that that tension remains. And that tension will play a crucial role later in the Revolutionary War. The British will try to use that against the colonials. And also, that tension will be utilized later in the War of 1812. Okay? So again, that tension doesn't go away, and you're right, it is probably really stupid for them to attack unarmed people who have already assimilated into the regular mainstream culture. But if you're willing to kill unarmed women and children, are you going to be willing to kill anybody? Yes, and generally speaking, sociologically speaking, and also psychologically speaking, if you can hurt women and children, the men of the societies are less likely to revolt and rebel. They will fall in line and do what you want them to do. Because they don't want to see their wives, mothers, sisters, or their children being killed. Does that make sense? It's literally psychologically one of the best ways that you can get a group of men to do what you want them to do, is by threatening the women and children in their lives. Maybe not right. And they don't understand the psychological piece there. Does that make sense? They don't understand the science behind it, but it works. Now, the writs of assistance are kind of working under the Molasses Act, and I apologize, it says the Sugar Act. So, up there, 1764. But there's still smuggling. And so the Crown wants to try to find a way to create a better enforcement and prevent that smuggling from occurring. And if it's going to occur with whatever trade we're able to control, we're going to get as much out of it as possible. So under the Sugar Act, as a way to regulate that illegal triangular trade, they actually take the Molasses Act, which charged 6 cents per gallon, 6 pence per gallon, and they actually reduce the tax to 3 cents per gallon. Their ideal here is if we actually reduce the tax, colonists will be more willing to pay it. And so we'll actually generate more revenue, more tax revenue. Okay? Right? It's not that far off of a concept, and it's a concept that economicists even today argue that we should do with our own tax code, that we should simplify it. If we simplified it and reduced it, but got rid of all the loopholes, we would actually generate more wealth in taxation. So it's not like crazy talk. Does that make sense? Okay? It actually makes a lot of sense. But if you were caught still selling to the French, you could go to jail. No trial, no jury, just automatic jail time. Psst. if they in there, hey, if you break this law, you're going to jail automatically. Why is this important?
Because you go to jail without trial by jury.
Yeah, and where does that appear?
And then,
It's a bill of
In the Bill of Rights, right?
Right, so it's
So again, what you need to really understand about these British restrictive policies is because we are so afraid that the American government will once again create these restrictive policies that once we pass the Constitution, the only way it can be ratified is if we agree to a Bill of Rights that literally lays out all these things that the British did against us and says, hey government, you can't do that. Now there were some like Hamilton and Washington that argued we don't need a Bill of Rights. But there were others like Jefferson that said, like, heck, we don't. Because, you know, there was this whole thing like the Magna Carta, you know, and we had rights as a British citizens, but apparently that didn't matter.